Hey everybody, Peter Green from Agile for All coming at you with your daily dose of Agile. Today's Wednesday, and on Wednesdays we go back to the basics. I saw several questions come up in the last few weeks around story points and different ways to estimate. So I wanted to take just a couple of minutes, walk through some of the basics of what story points are, what style of estimation those are, and a little bit of advice on how we use these and when we might use them. So let's start with the most common type of estimates that most teams give or are asked to give is a time estimate. I imagine, hundreds of years ago, a great master artist being asked to give an estimate. Hey, how long is it going to take to paint that ceiling? And that master artist might say, well, this ceiling is about this many square meters, and in the past, paintings of this size have taken me about this amount of time, and then giving that as an estimate. That's a time estimate. How long will it take? And that's what we usually do in most situations, and whether that be in construction or whether that be any kind of project or whether that be a product development. We're going to take our best guess of how long things like this have taken in the past and give that as a time estimate. The first part of that estimate, though, if you notice what we do naturally is we try to remember things that were of similar size. And that is called relative size estimation. So thinking of this project or this effort or this painting in that example, how big is this painting compared to other paintings like that in the past? And that relative size estimate is how our brains figure these things out. And so relative size estimation is a little different than time estimation, because I could say that this job is about twice as big as that job. I could say this painting is about twice as hard as that painting, and not tell you how long it's going to take. I could just tell you relative to that one, that's how big it is. So that's what a relative size estimate is, and that's what a story point is. A story point is a relative size estimate where we get some kind of a standard or a baseline item, and we usually look at across all of the work to be done, maybe historically the types of things that we build on a team, and we say, out of all these things, what are the smallest? What are a few examples of the smallest thing that we build around here? And we just randomly assign that a 1. And then we can say, hey, compared to that 1, where do they get about twice as big? And we get a few examples of what then would be 2s. And where do they get about 3 times as big, etc. And we call those relative size estimates or story points. So what we find is that those are often useful on teams where there's a high level of complexity, which really makes us anxious about trying to give a time estimate if there's uncertainty attached to the work. Trying to estimate it is, we know, just a wild guess, because there are going to be things that surprise us. You can imagine in the painting example of Michelangelo getting halfway through the Sistine Chapel ceiling and saying, oh, you know what? What if I had the hand of God coming down and the finger of Adam touching the hand as if giving life right then, and what would be cool is if the robe was kind of in the shape of a brain. Whoa, that would be awesome. I didn't account for that in my estimate. Should I do it or not? Well, yeah, we're shooting for a great outcome, not to meet the deadline in most cases. So unexpected discoveries like that can cause time estimates to be wrong and relative size estimates to be wrong. So estimates are always a guess. The problem is that a lot of organizations treat the work as if it's complicated, meaning predictable, and through analysis we can just figure out how long it'll take. The truth is that most of our projects have some complexity in them. Many of our projects have a tremendous amount of complexity in them, and so there's really no good way to estimate them. They are unestimable. They are not estimatable, and yet we're asked to do it. Because of that, in a lot of industries, when someone is asked to give an estimate, the anxiety goes up. They start freaking out about it. They grumble about it. They start figuring out buffering and all kinds of things like this. So for teams that have some of that psychological scar tissue around being asked to estimate, we find that switching to a relative size estimate can help remove some of the shoulder raising that happens when estimates are discussed, because we're not asking you how long it's going to take. We're asking you, how big is it compared to that other thing? And that is the first logical step that we do anyway when we estimate time. And B, because we're removing time from the equation, it removes a little bit of the psychological consternation around that, or the fear that comes with doing that. So that can be helpful for some teams. And then we essentially what we do is if a team is using some kind of a regular iteration or a regular cadence of delivery, we say how many of those points did they get done in any given iteration or in any given period of time. And then we can start to say on average we get about this many of those things done per period of time. We call that velocity. So that's kind of a high-level overview of what story points are, what relative size estimation is. I've seen this help some teams get much more accurate because it asks people to estimate how big something is in whole instead of subdivided into the expertise skill-based parts. Instead, we're asking on a whole, how big is this? So it causes teams to look at across the whole system that they're building out. What is it going to actually take rather than my part of it, which almost always misses things like integration and the connection between things, where a lot of the time is often hiding. So if you haven't tried story points or if your team is using them in a way that's different than that, you might want to reconsider whether are we using this as a team estimate to get something all the way to deliverable, and is it really a relative size estimate, or are people saying, oh, well, one story point equals 3 days, so let me estimate 3 days. That basically removes all of the power from this relative size estimation approach anyway. Last thing on this, and it's kind of if you're doing this, it might be a little bit of a downer because there's been some research on this by some companies where they've gone back and said, hey, if we were to just take all of the items and count the number of items that we did, would that have been as accurate a way to forecast the team's capability to deliver over the long term as using story points? So you can imagine instead of, our team gets 40 story points done per sprint, you might say our team gets 5 to 6 items done per sprint. And what they found is that it turned out that was as accurate a way to forecast what a team is capable of. And so all of the effort to estimate in that type of a system could be considered waste. If we could give just as accurate forecast without doing the work of estimating, then the active estimating doesn't bring us a lot of benefit. So there is some data around that. You may not be in a situation where that matters because you're still being asked to do it. You're still being maybe even made to do it. Like it's just how we work around here, and so you have to do it. But I thought I would mention that for some teams that might have the leeway or the autonomy to choose whether they want to use an estimate or not. Then there's some data that says, how about just try counting the number of items that you get done over time and see if that's a better way to track velocity with less effort. That's our daily dose for today. A little bit of a longer one to dig into the basics of story points and relative size estimation. If you found it helpful, please like the video, share it with a friend. And if you'd like to get this content on a regular basis, go ahead and subscribe to our channel and click the little bell icon next to it to get notifications when these come in. Hope everybody has a great week.